can do, to the extent that we have control over this, I think what we can do, both here as a community, like the Syrian American community, but also folks on the ground in Damascus, is to try always to widen the aperture, to talk about the opportunities that Syria offers. And I think we have an excellent ally in Ambassador Tom Barrack, who is the U.S. Special Envoy to Syria, because that's all he talks about. He talks about business and investment and opportunities and self-determination. So I think the needle is moving on that, but while I'm cautiously optimistic, I'm also cognizant, just because I'm a realist too, that this is going to stay with us. Now, what I can say on a panel like this, very maybe cryptically, is that the past 6 months have been incredibly tough, specifically because of this, because this neighbor to the south was not too enthusiastic. And so the first week after the fall of the Assad regime, they conducted, I think, about 400 airstrikes. Took out the whole navy, took out tanks and missiles and rockets, like pretty much the entire Syrian military. And then since then, it's been about 700 attacks. So 400 just the first week. Okay, I remember that was the first site that welcomed me to Damascus. The huge bombing up until the bombing continued until 3 a.m. I wasn't able to sleep because I was not used to it. People around me, slept like there was no problem. I wasn't able to because I wasn't used to it. And so I think it's public information. Reuters and other news agencies, the Netanyahu government didn't want sanctions to be lifted, does not want the United States to withdraw from Syria. They are deeply skeptical about the new government. I think President Trump took a decision despite those apprehensions, and a lot of lawmakers are just gonna, I think, go with the president. Now, if I recently did a tour of conservative circles in Washington, D.C., like we're talking like very far-right organizations, as well as very conservative lawmakers. We did that for a couple of days. And even though President Trump has made that decision, the skepticism is still there, and it's deep. And I think maybe as Syria proves that we are headed there. The president said we have no plans to pose a threat to any of our neighbors. They shut down the Captagon trade. That was a scourge and a blight in the region, especially for Saudi Arabia and Jordan and other countries. I think you're going to see more of those Syrian aspects being highlighted. But big picture, I think CT is going to stay with us.
Very quickly, just on the security question, when President Sharar talks about the economy, it's not a change of topic. The argument from the Syrian government is, yes, absolutely, security matters. DDR, I know we love this word, it was never implemented right anywhere else. But for such a process to be in place, you need to improve the economy. It was, at the beginning, in the first few months, it's a chicken and egg question. I think some of the Trump administration were saying, no, you need to do that first. You need to have control over all of Syria, control all of the security, and then sanctions would be lifted. And I think where the argument settled at the end is that that does not make any sense. If you want an effective state that actually controls the use of violence, controls who holds arms, you need to have the resources to do that. And if you want, and this is, I think, where the conversation, I guess, gets tricky. Yes, there are people who don't want this project to be successful. There are people in Washington who once said, all of the Arab Springs brought, the old regimes back. Why don't we try to bring back Assad? And they definitely don't want things to move forward. But I think what has been missing here is that the main security challenges that we've seen in the last 6 months, they're not sectarian in nature as they've been portrayed in Washington. They are political in nature. You have former regime or current regime supporters among the Alawite communities who did the first insurgency in the coast. You have current regime supporters within the Druze community who are still holding power in Jerman and Sweden. And that is the main challenge. So I think where the current leadership in Washington, where their mind is that, yes, we need to tackle those challenges in Syria because those are Assadists, those are pro-Iran supporters, and we need to have the the resources in place to be able to tackle those challenges, and that's where the sanction lifting actually came.
Right here. Paulsha, please go ahead. And if you can keep your questions brief and then
Maybe direct them to us specifically.
Yes.
So we're not all,
Yeah, we can get a couple of questions. So if you
Sure.
go ahead, Paulsha, and then behind you.
Yeah, my question, actually, you had mentioned a little bit about the deal, a possible deal with the SDF in the north, and we've heard that they have a very unique way of doing governance that's very inclusive of religious minorities, and that, whether that's going to be in clash or how that actually might play out. I was wondering if you could speak to some of those issues.
And then we'll take a question to your yes. And then we can answer to
Hi, and this is for whoever wants to answer it. One of my concerns is that Syria has changed hands from Russian control and domination to contested control and domination, primarily from the United States and potential Emirati and Saudi investors. The word democracy and democratic elections is not really on the table. We have a self-appointed president, and certainly this is better than war, and turning Syria into a bigger UAE-style country is better than war. But can we really talk about Syrian liberation without democracy? And I also wonder, in terms of the lifting of sanctions, what Syria had to give up in terms of concessions to the United States. There's been very little written about it, but I expect with our transactional president that Syria had to give up a nice slice of Syria's assets, just as Ukraine has, for continued U.S. support.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and answer those two.
Just a point. Maybe just a point about democracy. So democracy should continue. Democracy should 100%. I'm a pro-democracy activist, and that's why I spent the past 14, 15 years of my life fighting for this. So I'm in 100% alignment with you, and this should continue to be the aspiration and the goal. Now, having said that, I'll also share with you that I think it was 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago, I hosted the former Tunisian president for an event at my place, and I'll never forget what he shared with me, President Moussaf Marzouki. He said, and we share a lot of similarities because, I'm an activist. Of course, he's a much more high-profile, activist, but we come from the same background: activists, human rights activists, same. And so we're preoccupied with the same things. And I'll never forget what he told me. He was like, "We spent the first 3 years nitpicking about this word and that word and this phrase and that phrase in the Constitution, and look what happened to Tunisia now." Because eventually people got fed up and they felt that transition did not deliver on the promise. In their mind, democracy, I think, meant, economic transformation. So again, back to the daily realities. If you were to spend, and I would encourage you maybe to go and visit, and don't stay at a hotel, maybe stay with a friend. Experience life in Syria at the moment. If you've been there for a month, you will not want to talk about the same things that you just talked about now. You will want to ensure that your belly is full. So I think this is where we are now. And as far as that is concerned, I think the government has its priority raised. Now, once we've maybe successfully navigated this transitional period, I completely agree with you. I'm not trying to beat around the bush. It is a challenge. I am for separation of powers. I am for consultative decision making and so forth. And we need to have that because I think that's a root of all evil. But for us to, I think, be too focused on that at a time when people can't. I overheard arguments, heated arguments between older ladies and minibus drivers because they could not afford 5 cents to take the bus, and they were complaining that the fare had been doubled from, I think, 2 or 3 cents to 5 cents. This is where we are. We're not at a stage where we can discuss restoring democracy, but yes, I completely agree with you. It should continue to be that.
First question about SDF.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Just what you need, not something.
Yeah. Very quickly, I think on both.
What was in exchange?
Concessions. So very quickly, I think one on democracy and on the SDF question. I think as Syrians, it's really about the frameworks that exist. It's not really about the banners. I was in Syria in 2011. democracy as a word was not really on the agenda and our banners and our, yes, I mean, it sounds great, but because I've heard this a lot, why did the constitutional declaration did not include the word democracy? Well, I mean, I was there in 2011. For me, the word democracy itself is not my battle. It's not the hill I want to die on. The hill I want to die on is whether there is freedom of expression, freedom of political organization, and then, yes, there is a political process in place where there is election. Whether that is called democracy or not, to be honest, as a Syrian, I don't really care, like how we call it as Syrian, because we have our own experience, and we do have the right to call our experience the way we like it. We're not bound by specific liberal Western democracy terms. We love the experience. We want to copy that and make sure it is like we have a representative democracy, but it might have a different name. So just like on the title, I think on the experience itself, and that actually goes to the Northeast Project and the Autonomous Administration Project. The Autonomous Administration Project has a lot of those. It has the nice titles. It has in every single position a president, like a co-presidents, a man and a woman. It looks great, but from the inside, it's really rowdy. Because in every single institution you have, yes, you have a man and a woman leading the institution, but there is someone called a cadre, basically someone who's a member of the Marxist, Communist, PKK, who actually controls the institution. So in a sense, yes, it is great to have a man and woman place. It's great that you call it, a democratic institution. But at the end of the day, it is not democratic, and it is controlled by one single party like the Ba'ath regime. So do we want to copy that experience to the rest of Syria? I don't think Syrians want that experience to be copied. Do we want that local communities with specific cultural and religious heritage to see that cultural and religious heritage reflected in their own communities? Absolutely, yes. I mean, I can tell you, even like as a Kurd myself, yes, that is very important, because that is what, at the end of the day, matters for average Syrians, whether Kurds, Assyrians, Druze, or otherwise. It's not what the capital looks like. You see your culture and your heritage and your religion in the schools you send your kids to, in the street that you live in, and that's what really matters at the end of the day. And that is the model, I guess, we see some infrastructure put forth for it. The conversation right now between Damascus and Qamishli, actually very much there's an agreement on that part. The problem is that we have with the SDF is that the SDF controls 3 provinces of Hasakeh, Raqqa, and Deir ez-Zor. The vast majority of those provinces are Arabs, they are not Kurds. And basically the SDF is saying, we currently control that, good luck. It's like, it's not really about the Kurdish project, because the government has already said, go back to Kurdish regions, and all of those cultural and, and religious and heritage rights, you will have it there for your own communities as any other Syrian community. But the SDF wants to, right now, to maintain control over Arab majority or almost 100% Arab communities, especially in Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor. So that's where the conversation is. I think if that is resolved, and I can tell you, I think the mistake that the PYD is doing as a political party, is that it is jeopardizing the Kurdish experience in Syria. There is a very possible and good win for the Kurdish community in Syria, especially the ones who came in the early 1900s. They still speak Kurdish, they live in northeast Syria. They're a minority within the Kurdish community, but they've been taking the lead on this conversation. And they can actually make something for the Kurdish community, but I think wanting a lot more than what is possible might jeopardize that. Last but not least, on just the concessions, so far there has been, and that is something, I can tell you, the Syrian government could tell you the exact same thing, US officials have said the exact same thing. There were no conditions when it came to sanctions lifting. There are mutual security concerns that will be addressed. It's not something that the Syrian government does not want to address. Whatever you hear in media, it is something that is of concern for the Syrian government. But President Trump and Secretary Rubio, Ambassador Barak made it very clear that if Syria does not succeed, that is the problem. That is what everyone is trying to prevent. Not only the United States, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, everyone in the region, they see the alternative. And the alternative is very bad for the region, for the United States. The second thing, which is very important, yes, there is an opportunity for Syria. And I think whether it is President Trump or others in the administration, they do see the economic opportunity that maybe it doesn't exist. It exists in Ukraine, possibly if there is a deal, but it doesn't exist as much in Syria. You have at least a $1 trillion of possible infrastructure projects that could be done in Syria. The EU has already committed just for this year $7 billion for infrastructure projects in Syria. The Gulf has not even set basically a budget for that. So is there an economic opportunity where actually, from U.S. perspective, U.S. companies can come in and invest? Yeah, absolutely. And for that, it does make sense then to lift sanctions. If we see something down the line, it's important to point out, but as a watcher, let's say, there has been, this whole conversation is about the opportunity that Syria can present for the U.S. and for the region.
Thank you so much. I know there's a lot of questions.
And we have only 2 minutes left.
We have 2 minutes left, so we'll go here. But then our panelists will be around and you can have a conversation. And I think we need to do a day-long Syria conversation.
I need more Syria.
Yeah. So I think we need to maybe our organizations work together on doing a day-long thing because I think there's a lot of implications. We'll go here and take 2 questions and then we'll end it. Go ahead, please. You can stand up and ask a question and I'll repeat it if need be.
I think for the recording the next.
Yeah, time is up, but I have 2 quick questions.
Let's go one and
one. I don't know which one I prefer. So, since we are talking in the panel at the head of defending democracy in Muslim world, I think Iranian influence was terrible in Syria, but Turkey's as a model should not be negative as well. Because yes, Syria had the Sednaya, but now Erdogan has Silivri. The Istanbul mayor now in jail, who was the main rival to him. So this ideology, the political Islamist ideology, I am very much happy that Syrians got the freedom, but I as a person experienced this, I like to warn that you need to be careful, and if there are some control mechanisms to prevent sliding back into an Islamic-oriented authoritarianism, which will be terrible. I don't know what one of the panelists can take. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And then we'll take your question, and then we'll wrap up the session.
Just very quickly, Sanjeev Berry with Freedom Forward. There was a moment when people in the West didn't have a story to tell about the Syrian refugee crisis, and then there were actors with malintent who told a story that was very harmful. And it seems like we're in the former moment now, a good moment, where there's an opportunity to build political power and goodwill beyond policymakers, beyond the Syrian diaspora, beyond even Muslim American communities. Amidst everything else that you're dealing with, all of the challenges, has there been thought given to that kind of a political program?
I didn't understand.
Yes, can you? Yeah.
Just briefly, maybe just to repeat, a lot of people in the West, outside of diaspora circles, outside of American Muslim circles, don't have a story yet about the new Syria and the future of Syria. Someone's going to tell that story, right? Vacuums don't exist for long in politics. Is there a strategy, or has there been thought given to how to fill that vacuum in a positive way to empower you to do what you need to do?
Yeah.
So obviously, you know, a lot of, I think, civil society organizations here, you know, Syrian American community organizations or others, that's what they work on. And also the Syrian government, again, there's a government in Syria, they have agency, they have plans. So I don't know, maybe Qutayba can shed any lights on that. But, you know, for example, I'm also advising a group called the Syrian Forum on promoting investment and reconstruction in Syria. And that's the job of such organizations, go out there and tell that story. I'm really interested to see what will happen in the cultural space. because again, Syria has an advantage there in terms of its rich history, culture. Just the ruins in Syria are spectacular, and they are essentially part of the cradle of civilizations where alphabet was invented. So on that, I think you're going to see that. Particularly the Syrian American community is extremely creative and hardworking, and they've had some wins right now, and they want to keep winning in the form of normalizing the relationships between the U.S. and Syria and seeing Syria reach its full potential. On the other piece regarding, gentlemen, sounds like you're Turkish, and so that's a question for Syria. I mean, just to be very fair-minded about it. Syria couldn't recover without lifting the sanction or grow. But as you do that, you are empowering the current government to become more effective, more powerful, right? More popular, stronger. Is this government going to be representative of most Syrians and their aspirations or not? That's the question. And can they do that with the current formulations? They came to power. Now we have 4 or 5 years for the elections. What lies beyond that? Will they be able to include groups or individuals who didn't liberate Syria with them? Right? There's a group identity here also. We get hung up on Islamist or not Islamist, but it's a group identity. It's a group that fought and weathered a lot of tribulation in a corner of Syria. They know each other. They trust each other. They know who their friends were during the difficult years. And then they rode down to Damascus and won. And will they be able to be inclusive or transition that power eventually to another group? I think the Syrian people, what they're clear about is, yes, they want economic recovery and stability now. But also the Syrian people did not fight and die against a dictator to replace it with another. I think they know, and I think the Syrian government knows this. And so my hope is that they will navigate that through transparent, fair, and humane processes. And I agree with Qutaiba, what we call it is going to be less important, but it needs to look and feel and smell like democracy.
Thank you so much. A round of applause for our panelists for this great discussion. When it comes to the culture part, someone's going to write President Shara's story in Hollywood. You guys better get on that, because someone's definitely going to write that story. But thank you so much, and we hope to continue this conversation, and I'll pass it back over to the board.